Welcome to the Pansa Pansa Forum. In the Yoruba language, the word pansa is usually injected into poetry to express an uncomfortable, uncensored, and inconvenient truth. The Pansa Pansa Forum is candid conversations about the life of African immigrants in America as it relates to their adaptation to their new home. While some may find it easy to integrate and can balance between retaining the original African culture while accepting the culture of their new home, many continue to struggle to find a balance between both worlds.
Hello and welcome to Pansa Pansa Live. This is a podcast where we discuss the lives of African immigrants and their assimilation into Western society as they raise younger generations in a country that is quite different from their own. We also explore the experiences of children of immigrants as they balance the African and Western cultures. We present to you this informative, interesting, and expansive dialogue about the intricate experiences of African immigrants in America.
Okay, welcome to Pansa Pansa. I'm your host, Kemi Seriki, and today I'm so thrilled and honored to have Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, a licensed clinical psychology, a frequent keynote speaker, and a guest lecturer at various universities, including Harvard University, Middlebury College, Sonoma State University, and other universities also in Canada, England, as well as in India too. So I came across Dr. Akomolafe's profile on Facebook about the seminar that he was planning on giving to therapy services provider titled, Where Do We Go When Healing Becomes Ill? Navigating the Empire of Trauma. After connecting with his website, and I was incredibly impressed with the background and the journey that shaped who he has become today. I asked if he was open to have conversation with me, and I was so thrilled that he accepted my invitation. So welcome to Pansa Pansa podcast, Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, and thank you so much for setting time aside today out of your busy schedule to be on Pansa Pansa platform. I am so delighted to have you on this platform to share your wisdom with our members of African immigrant community in the diaspora about how the role of traditional belief system influence the perception and the approach and the management of mental illness, also bringing the importance of mental health awareness to African immigrant community in the diaspora. So for many of our audience who may be curious to know about your background, and I actually regularly ask my guests, can you fully introduce yourself? I know I spoke a little bit about that. Maybe there's some things I'm missing. Talk a little bit about your background to our audience as to where you were born, where you spent most of your childhood and adult life.
Thank you very much, Ma, for the warm welcome and introduction. My name is Bayo Akomolafe, and I grew up in most of my life in Lagos, but because I came from a very itinerant family, my father was constantly traveling. He was a diplomat with the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I grew up around the world, actually, in Europe, Germany, Finland, and then moved to Nigeria, and then moved to now the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was then Zaire. Yes, in the heydays of Mobutu Sese Seko. So I'd always had this sense of the global or the traveler. I'd always been interested in disrupting normative or stable ways of thinking about the world. When my father passed away, which was quite traumatic for my family and myself, I proceeded to school in a place called Ota, just in Ogun State. I was one of the pioneer students of this freshly minted private university called Covenant University. That was an experiment in higher education that was meant to disrupt the ways that higher education conducts itself in Nigeria. And this is where I learned psychology, finished with a first-class degree, went to do a master's, proceeded immediately to do a PhD, started teaching, did some work at the mental hospital in Aru, in Abeokuta, and then moved to the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Enugu to intern there. while I was doing my PhD, and this is maybe how I want to fully introduce myself and bring myself in here. While I was doing my PhD, there was a crisis in Nigeria. And the crisis was one of a lack of budgetary allocation to neuropsychiatric hospitals. There was no concern for people who were suffering from some degree of mental disturbances or whatever. And so everyone started to think, well, let's just ask for more money. It comes down to money. It's always an issue of money. We don't have bed spaces. We don't have as many trained psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. We need money. And I remember thinking, what if the way we are thinking about this problem is part of the problem? What if there are other ways to think about this that have nothing to do with already existing institutions? So I went to study for my PhD, Babalawos. And yes, which was a very, very controversial thing to do in a Christian university and from a Christian background. But I wasn't careful about that. I really wanted to ask different kinds of questions, even though they were dangerous. So I went to study with them, asked them questions. How did they treat their people? And they taught me things. And this became my PhD. And it was such a beautiful project that even though the people that sat on my committee were quite uncomfortable with the thesis, they could not but say that this was a wonderful project to do, but don't push it. So that's how I want to introduce myself. I've been journeying. I'm still on the journey, asking questions, hopefully.
So how did that studying under Babalawo impact your view about mental health?
Oh, man. So I started to have a crisis while I was a psychologist and interning at the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Enugu. Sometimes I would take in clients, and when they come to me, they would say things like Oga, which is for those who are listening that are not Nigerian. Oga means boss or something. Oga, please give us a shock, wash. They were referring to electroconvulsive shock therapy. They were referring to shock therapy. And they would often say to me, when I asked them questions in the ways that I was trained, like, tell me what's happening with you. They would push it back on me and say, Oga, you tell me what they do me. Tell me what's wrong with me. So I started to feel that, this is another example. I remember one man telling me, I have your type at home. Now, this is all pidgin. For those who are not Nigerian that are listening, to say I have your type at home is to say, I'm too big. I'm too much of an elder for you to be asking me all these questions. So I started to really feel the cross-cultural tensions between the way that I was trained in Western-styled psychotherapy and how it wasn't really serving my people. And this made me interested in cross-cultural psychology and psychotherapies. And this is one of the things that motivated me to go to the Babalawos, to ask them, what are your modalities? Do you have a diagnostic system? Do you have questions that you ask that we are not asking? And they would often tell me that, of course, your people, referring to not only pastors, but other psychologists. And so your people come to us for advice. We teach them under the radar. They come to us and we teach them stuff. And it was very fascinating. So I learned from them very, very valuable things, not only about cross-cultural psychology, not only that psychotherapy and mental health is a political category. It's not just, right? There's a way that people and contexts in the global north, like in the United States, think about well-being and pathology that is unique to their context. Yeah. Right? That there's no such thing as a generic mental health that is not already a political thing. So I really learned those lessons listening to them and learning about, especially, this is probably the most critical one, that what we name as a sickness in the DSM manual, which is the Bible for clinical psychologists, or the ICD, right? The latest iterations are the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 or 11. what we learned to think of as a sickness, they thought of as a spiritual crisis. I asked one of them, I said, could you tell me about how you treat people that present with auditory hallucination? Auditory hallucination is hearing voices in your head, right? And this man said, why would you want to treat that? What if that's your grandmother? What if that's your grandfather? What if that's your ancestor trying to reach out to you? So there was already a different culture and a different way of holding. It's just that we as colonized people are used to importing whatever the West says. We import it and we try to stabilize it and say, this is it. But I think we ought to be careful about doing that.
And it's so important what you just said. It is so important. And that comes from the time of colonization that we've had contact with the European.
Yes.
Even our presentation of how we speak, how we write, everything we do is to actually follow every guide and steps of what they do.
Yes.
Detrimental to our system is completely out of this world. You know, we are not paying attention. And I'm glad that you pay attention to that. Because even as I continue to dip into the history of mental health and psychology, mental illness, I found out that every culture is different, even within American society. When you go and meet a therapy, you have to understand what that person's culture, how do they interpret things? How do they see things?
Yes. It's very important. It's very important. Black communities, there's research on this. Black Americans are less likely to visit a therapist than white Americans. Minorities in general seem less likely to visit a therapist. They are more likely to confide in a grandmother, an elder, or some other authority figure in their community. So mental health and wellness or well-being is not a thing that is already fully fleshed out and already made. It is a thing that is ongoing, cultural, contextual, situated.
Yeah, that is so true, because even from what I have learned, that is something that they continue to work on, even in American society, because research continues to take place all the time to understand. But I want to bring something that you just said of somebody hearing voices, whereby the Babalawo will say, oh, maybe it's your ancestor who are trying to speak to you. Should that person, can we just believe that, or we still need to seek help for that person?
Well, there's so many things we take for granted that are being critiqued and called into question today. For instance, the idea that I am a self and I'm disconnected from the world. I'm disconnected from other things. I have my own private self. You know, everyone thinks of that as common sense. It's commonsensical. You are private, you are separate. But what if that's not exactly true? What if there are other things that are happening? Psychologists are now beginning to speak about embodied cognition. Embodied cognition is their way of noticing that a lot of the things that we try to put inside our bodies as this is me, this is myself, this is my identity, is actually part of the environment around us. Right? So even with clinical psychologists, we, over the past, decade or so, we now have to say things like intergenerational trauma. That I don't have to experience trauma to be part of a traumatic community, right? Or a traumatized community. This is how Black Americans are able to say, I am still suffering the effects of the transatlantic slave trade. I don't need to have been on the slave ship, but because I'm part of a community, trauma is not just personal experience or personal injury. Trauma is also culture and how a culture interacts. So I think it is compelling. It is very, very compelling to say we should be careful about naming a part of the world as sickness, whereas it could be a gift. In other words, a pothole, we have plenty of potholes in Lagos. A pothole could be a portal. That is a bridge to other ways of seeing and knowing the world. We just need other modalities and other ways of holding that. And the good news is that we have these technologies, right? It doesn't have to be Sigmund Freud or another Western psychotherapy. There's Peter Ebigbo in Eastern Nigeria with his harmonization therapy. There are many Africans that have systems that help us take care of ourselves.
But
so
many of us are here. And
yes.
I'm going to go back to hearing voices and somebody who's going through psychotic episodes who might need to be hospitalized.
Yes.
Who might need, because if they don't do that, also we are in a society now where drug use.
Yes.
It could lead them to start using drugs, alcohol, which would be detrimental to their health.
Yes.
Their well-being. So what would you say about that?
Well, it always depends on the context and the case. I'm not saying, for instance, that one should banish Western psychotherapies. I don't think in terms of this or that binaries, right? I am, however, suggesting that sometimes even the way we try to help our clients and help patients and help people that are suffering could be a deeper way of making the problem worse, right? It could make the problem worse. There's a lot of stuff that goes around and looks like health and well-being that is actually making a lot of the world's problems even more problematic, right? So I have never told anyone not to get therapy, for instance. I will never do that. But I think there's also a place for noticing that we need to think through other technologies. We need to think through other practices, other cultural formations. And I can give some examples of why this is crucial. In 2004, the tsunami that hit part of Asia, it escalated one of the greatest psychology or psychotherapeutic responses from around the world. Clinical workers, social workers, psychologists, they flew down to that region of the world to help people who were suffering from trauma from the tsunami, the floods that came. Okay. My wife happened to be a young girl growing up in India when that tsunami hit part of India. But something came out of that report that the psychologists seemed to tend to white people, white tourists that were in Asia, not the indigenes of that region. It seems like their technologies were not available for them, which suggests to me that even trauma is racial.
Yes, of course.
Trauma is a racialized category. Some people are allowed to be traumatized. Some people are not allowed to be traumatized because they don't fit the category of being human. So when I hear examples of people that are in dire need of some support, it's a very difficult question to pose, but it's a balancing act in some way. We need a way to care for people, but we also need a way to interrogate the ways we care for people, or else we keep on.
Yeah. What you just said now reminds me of many issues regarding when a Black person goes to the hospital and they are sick. They might not be given a painkiller because they think our body, is actually could endure pain compared to
yes.
And now, being that many whites, they've been given painkiller, they are used to taking medication and all that stuff. They actually also talk about opioid epidemics, why it is rampant among white people compared to other people of color.
Yes.
Because of these feelings.
Yes. And it's just like saying to people who are in some kind of opioid dependency, it's just like saying to them, just say no. You can do it. Just say no. It's not, you can't just say no. Yeah. We are embedded in very, very strong relationships with the world around us. So you can't just tell a person to say no. You need a caring modality that meets that person culturally, spiritually, in an embodied way. And that's why my practice didn't work in Eastern Nigeria, because it was culturally out of place.
Yeah.
those bodies were wanting something different. They wanted maybe drumming, or they wanted pounded yam.
Yes.
Who says that eating together, rolling a ball of pounded yam, just about to dunk it into a bowl of egusi soup, who says that that isn't psychotherapy?
You're so right. I remember a long time ago, I read the book of Andrew Solomon. He's a white American who also suffered from mental health issues.
Okay.
He suffered from depression, and he was trying to find the answer all over to see how do they treat different mental health issues. He went to countries in Africa, he went to Asia, and he saw that it's so different the way treatment are being put in place. And what is their perception? What the Western world may call depression may not be a depression in that part of the world. You know, that really opened my eyes to actually what you just indicated.
Yeah. We have a lot of these technologies that are emergent. They're also playful and experimental. And I think beyond sensitizing people to the reality of mental issues, we want to sensitize people to their power, that they're powerful and we can do things together. We don't always have to depend on existing institutions.
Yes. So I want to ask you, so you completed your PhD in Nigeria, you lectured in Nigeria, and you've traveled to lecture your specialty in different parts of the world.
Yes.
What is the experience like bringing this kind of phenomena, theory to them? What is it like?
There's a lot of interest around the world for different kinds of, I would call it, approaches. People are asking questions because it seems even therapy is not working for privileged folks, right? People are beginning to question, and I think this really came to popular awareness during the COVID pandemic, because there is a global industry, and you could call it the global industry of wellness, where wellness is an industry now. It involves yoga,
which is another culture that America.
Exactly. It's all it's a globalizing, it's a melting pot kind of arrangement. So it's yoga, it's health, food, and all of that. Yes.
Meditation.
Yes. All of that together is a network. And you would think that during a pandemic, when millions of people are dying, that such an industry would reflect the moment or what's happening. Instead, the global wellness industry is skyrocketing. It's becoming increasingly expensive. It's heavily monetized. It's so monetized. I think it's maybe in 10 years or 20 years, it will be multiple trillions. To be multiple trillions of dollars, this globalizing wellness industry. What does it mean? So I am asking the question, what does it mean to be well, to get a clean bill of health when everyone around you is dying? It seems like, I forget is it Krishnamurti that said, it's either Krishnamurti or Martin Luther King, I can't quite remember, but it's no measure of health to be well adapted to a sick society.
Wow.
Right. If you're adapted to a sick society and they say you're good, you're well, all you need to do is just align with yourself. Then there's something wrong, it would seem. So when I travel with this story, a lot of people are really brought in because they feel this as well.
Wow. I'm glad you're bringing this knowledge to the world. So you've written 2 books.
Yes, I have.
You also co-authored some other books too. To mention a few, one of the books that I saw, This World Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home. And then the other one, we will tell our own story. We will tell our own story, The Lion of African Speaks.
Yes.
Can you briefly describe 2 of these books?
In These Worlds Beyond Our Fences, well, let me start with, we will tell our own story. I was freshly graduated from school and I was doing my master's then. And I decided, I went for a conference in Malaysia where I was speaking about decolonizing the university. And I remember meeting some very, very, inspiring elders. Professor Molefi Kete Asante is Black American. He's considered the father of Afrocentrism, Augustine Nwoye. There were many people that I met there that I was so excited to speak with. And so I decided quite ambitiously to write a book. And I told them that I was going to write a book about Africa and decolonizing truth and concepts that we've just taken for granted, education, well-being, all of that. You know, we're going to kind of deconstruct it from an African perspective. And I wrote to these two. They didn't know me. I was, like I said, I was doing a master's. They didn't know me. And I invited them to write with me and they said yes. Oh. And for many years we wrote, and it was my first book. It was a miracle that happened, to gather such powerful intellectuals from around the world. And there are others there, to write with you. It was very, 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 very heartwarming. And then These Wars Beyond Our Fences was my first entry into a global consciousness. I started to explore themes that have to do with quantum physics. And there are other philosophical concepts that I don't need to bring up here since that's not part of our conversation.
Yes.
I wanted to frame that as letters to my daughter.
Yes.
The imagination was, what will the world look like when I'm dead and when my daughter has to be in my place? And it was also a way for me to deal with my father's death. And the book is still being taught in some universities today. Around the world, and has taken me a very, very long way.
Wow. Yeah. That's so powerful. I'm so impressed by what you're doing. And I'm glad that you're bringing that knowledge to the world and for them to recognize that. And I think, many people, as time goes on, your work will be globally well known. It's already getting there anyway. It's already getting there. So I know we've discussed it a little bit. So based on your clinical experience, how do traditional African belief system influence the way mental illness is perceived on the continent among the Africans in the diaspora?
Okay, not the African continent. You're speaking about Africans in diaspora, how it's perceived.
Yeah.
Well, to my knowledge, and I was part of an African Mental Health Summit in Minnesota. I've been part of that for 2 years now. It would seem to be the case that it's a toss-up between an understanding or a lack of informational understanding about mental health in the diasporic communities and lack of access to these resources, right? It's not that African immigrants, for instance, don't want to take advantage of these resources. Of course, that's only one part of the story. Another part is that they're not just acculturated into thinking about these matters in that way, that what you're feeling might be depression, or if you're feeling in this way, then you visit a therapist or you take some medication or a pill, right? Yeah. And this is, you might say, some sort of disadvantage, because to live in the United States, for instance, is to have to deal with context and trauma and infrastructure and the nation state and empire and a racially diverse and complicated society, right? And all those things necessitate different kinds of responses. But in my view, it is not entirely a disadvantage. And that's what I'm trying to say here. I think we will be shortchanging ourselves if we insist that the only way to see this is as a crisis, right? I feel that it's not that United States has it right and that the DSM has it right. And all we have to do is to travel along that road and arrive at what they already know. Yes. Because that would be a denial of what our bodies also know, what our cultures also know. Yeah. The history of the transatlantic slave trade is also the history of the transportation of medical technologies from the African continent to the so-called New World. That there are many stories of slaves going into the forest and picking up a plant and then knowing that it cures a particular disease. And their masters find them and whip them and say, what kind of devilry is this? This is horrible. You don't know how to think. And then they take it to a lab and test it and find out, oh, it works. and they now adopt it as scientific knowledge. I think we know things too, right?
Of course.
It's a complicated and nuanced situation. To be an immigrant in a strange world will call on us to adapt to strange circumstances in some way. Mm-hmm. And that may mean learning to be informed about these technologies, these points of access. But I think the more we come together as a people to learn together, to experiment, and to think together, we might find that what we already have is also a powerful context for new kinds of therapies, for new kinds of experiments.
Because,
yes.
To me, sometimes when we talk about mental illness back home, this perception is that somebody who is on the street, talking to themselves, who is naked on the street, who the family already disowned that they don't even want to associate with. Those are the stigma. Those are the view of how we see somebody who is suffering from mental illness. Without understanding that there's other ways also. Somebody who is, let me say, maybe have some form of anxiety whereby all the time they continue to repeat the same thing over and over again. They become addicted to certain things or certain way of thinking. All those things have an impact. And sometimes when our children are going through certain things, we don't even recognize it. That if a parent is being called and said, I think your child may be suffering from some depression from school, that they see the behavior of this child is something that they need to look into. And the parents looking and saying, what kind of depression? What does depression mean? Why would you be depressed? Because our mentality of depression is that lack of access. It is to say you have food, you have clothes, you have everything. Why would you be depressed? Depression only affects those people who are lack of resources.
Yes. I think that reflects really culturally grounded realities. And yes, it speaks to the ways that we've learned to dismiss these qualities. We've learned to just, say, there's nothing here. Don't talk about depression in that way. But you see, how else to speak about the place of the elder, for instance, and what the elder does in Yoruba community, for instance? How do we acknowledge that even a dismissal, which is very risky, even an elder saying, forget it, there's no such thing as depression, even in that dismissal, there might be some technology that we are not paying attention to. My point here is that having studied and continuing to be a student of American or Euro-American therapies and the history of these therapies and how they developed, right? I don't know how to speak about these things as if they were just out there. Like, for instance, trauma is an industrial phenomenon. What trauma is and what it's doing and how it came to be formulated in that way is deeply connected with the rapid industrialization of Europe and America. And other authors, I'm not the first to say this, many authors have been talking about the importation of American values and even American psychotherapies, like how to think about our bodies, how to think about ourselves. All these things are very, very Western-centric. I read a paper once about the resurgence of postpartum depression, and its prevalence, cross-cultural prevalence between Western societies and societies in the global South. And that's generic. That's very broad. But think about a place like Calabar, which is South Nigeria. Think about a place like Calabar, the Efik people, or the tradition of when a woman has just given birth, they put her in this huge bath with hot water. And it's almost like, now in the West, that will be seen as traumatic. Like you're hurting me, and then a new diagnostic criterion will come from that. But it seems that seemingly unsophisticated move is actually, it seems to be connected with lower prevalence rates of postpartum depression among those Nigerians. So it's interesting to me. I'm sensing into the politics of well-being and the politics of treatment.
And what you just said now is so powerful, because back home, when a woman gives birth, there's a community around her all the time.
Yes.
In some home, the grandmother will move in, aunts will move in as a mother, because they know how a body, of a woman who just gave birth needs to be nurtured.
Yes.
They would prepare the food for her. They would do everything that she needed to do so that she could rest her body. And also, apart from that, the only thing she might be responsible for is just to breastfeed the baby. Every other thing, somebody will be there.
Yes.
But when we move down to this country, we don't have that resources. Because we're left alone. There's no grandmother coming from anywhere. And that will actually expose us, because like you said before, when we are in a different environment, being that in the West, the culture is different, everything is different. And it has a lot of effect on us, both psychologically, emotionally, and also physically.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's particularly insightful to notice what we have been saying, that when people cross over to the other side, when they start to live in industrialized societies, different needs come, different potentials and possibilities emerge. And that's why I cannot rule out visiting your therapist. But at the same time, I'm not going to be an absolute advocate for the only way to think about this is that we must visit the therapist, because of what we already know about the politics of well-being. I'm just going to say this to people who are listening, that you probably have heard about the Tuskegee experiments. In 1932, the Public Health Board in the United States wanted to study what they called bad blood, right? And they gathered over, it was from 1932 to the 1970s, so it was over like 40 years. They gathered black men from Alabama, mostly black men, and studied bad blood. Only in the 70s did a journalist reveal through the New York Times that there was no such thing as bad blood. They were experimenting on these men with syphilis. They were injecting them without their consent. And this is public health, right? So we want to be careful about what we adopt as health, right? Like, this is health. This is what it means to be well. Like, we want to be researching communities. I think immigrant communities are researching communities.
Yes.
We want to be researching communities, holding questions about what does it mean to be well here? What does it mean to be transported away from the homes that we've already known? And there are ways this is already happening. I'm not saying researching like go back to university. I'm saying when we sit together in our homes and we ask about, how is your daughter? Oh, I heard she's gone to school. All of that is part of research. And we're constantly making new ways of being in the world through those conversations.
Which is so important, because like I said before, back home, there's a lot of support back home.
Yes.
To the extent that, because the stigma that we have towards mental illness also do have an impact.
Yes. Yes.
How we, whether we want to talk about somebody seeking therapy when they see some changes, in the behavior of a child or themselves, so there has to be a way to reach out, because a lot of all these things that you're indicating, America understand what they've done in the past and what they continue to do. We have to continue to bring that awareness and knowledge out that every community needs to be studied. And they need to input that in their treatment process. And that is so important to understand. And by us also making that voice of what you are doing and many others, we need more voices like you to bring a lot of this awareness to the public. And to actually challenge those in academia so that they could actually have the training for those who are providers out there. Understand that. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, for a therapy who may be listening to this podcast and they are working with a client who is an immigrant from Africa, can you give advice how these therapists can navigate the intersection of traditional beliefs and modern psychology?
Well, first of all, you want to take into consideration that psychology isn't finished. It's an ongoing conversation, right? What it means to be a self, what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a human being living in a pandemic, what it means to be a human being living in the midst of the Anthropocene, which is a word that involves, it's not reducible to it, but it involves climate chaos and all the effects that feel like harmful effects on the planet. What it means to live in that is still going on. That is why new psychologies are cropping up everywhere and every time, right? There's furniture psychology. Well, this isn't new, but I've been speaking about prolonged grief disorder. That if you experience grief for more than a year, then there's something wrong with you. This is the DSM. That there's something wrong with you. Yes, this is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. This is the Bible for psychotherapists, for clinical practitioners. That if you experience grief, what that already means is that it cancels out other ways of experiencing the world.
Yes.
My father passed away. I remember we're going to the village. He was from Kogi State. We're going to the village, and I saw with my sister, we're in a convoy. I saw people running down the street, people that I'm not sure my father ever met. But through the glass, I saw people screaming, market women screaming and tearing their clothes. And then when we got to the site where we're supposed to lay him in the ground, people were rolling on the ground. And I was a schooled child from the city. I'd never experienced anything like this. And I remember getting annoyed that these people are taking away the attention that should be given to the primary, grievers, not them. It was only later in my studying with Professor Nwoye, while I was doing a PhD, that we started to discuss all the ways that grief emerges, all the ways that it is practiced in different African communities. That we understand that grief is not a private affair. Grief is a public matter.
Yeah.
No one individual can hold grief by yourself, right? It's always a practice of meeting the other.
Others,
right? Yeah. But to live in the West is to be largely shut out from understanding that, right? So to people to practitioners who are asking questions, I'll just encourage you to keep asking questions, but never fall for the idea that modern therapies are where we need to arrive at. Because the modern is racialized. The modern is political, right? Yeah. And I'm not also saying we need to go back to some kind of neat, convenient African thing where we can just pick it up from the library. No, our society is like every society is troubled. There are shadows everywhere. But I think as you start to ask questions about these moments, about these times, notice the politics of what you're doing. Notice the politics of therapy. Ask questions beyond your immediate environment. Follow your client to their world and don't just stick to the book, right? All the things you studied in your book. And maybe from there, the world might meet you differently and new things might emerge.
I know it's not part of it. When we talk about psychotherapists, it's also merged with psychiatrists.
Yes, psychiatry, psychotherapy. Yeah.
Some people may need medication.
Yes.
Apart from going through talk therapy, because there's some diagnosis that no matter what we say, we have not advanced to that level where we came. Even though Babalawo and the herbs that we had back home that they could have developed since it was discovered, developed to modernize to this level, but we don't have that. So we depend on Western medication to help with some of these ailments. So what is your opinion on that in terms of psychiatric medication, maybe for depression, people who suffer from mood disorders and major mental health issue, whereby if they don't, because I just retired from my job and I worked in the field where I came in contact with many people who abuse drugs. And of course, the mental health challenges were not addressed at early stages when it was initially in place. Then they need some form of relief. Then they need to start using marijuana, then graduate into very hardcore drugs to the extent that now they are not just dealing with psychiatric disorder, they also have an addiction. So it comes to diagnosis.
I understand. And this feels conclusive. I will respond by saying that the history of the war on drugs in the United States is indebted to some studies. And one of such studies, colloquially, had to do with rats in a maze. There's this psychology experiment where a rat or mouse is put in this maze. It's like this wooden invention, contraption, where they're trying to study learning behaviors in these creatures, right? They want to understand when they will turn to the left or when they will turn to the right. Every time the mouse turned the right way, it was rewarded with some food, right? And it would press a button. But every time this happened, it was given a psychoactive substance. So the mouse became addicted, right? It was addicted to those substances. And it kept on happening. It kept on happening. The United States used these experiments as justification for its war on drugs, to say that the rats or the mice were dying from their addiction. Even when they were offered food, they could not eat the food. They just wanted the drug, and they kept on pressing the button that went for the drug. But someone or a group of researchers developed a different experiment. They put the mice in a rat paradise of some kind, a park. And even these mice that were addicted weaned themselves off their addiction. And the idea was that it's not that the whole war on drugs story is wrong. It's not that the mice, there's something wrong with the mice. It's that there's something wrong with the society where the mice live in. Right? So this isn't to dismiss the story of addiction. It's to situate addiction as political. It could be that those people that are suffering from these things are resonating with anxiety in the city. They are feeling things in the air and they don't know how to channel it. It's a problem of social consciousness. It's a problem of social repression. But we as psychologists are trained to focus on the individual. And so we take the individual, we heal the individual if that's possible. We get the individual to get better, and then we put the individual back in the circumstances that gave that crisis, that gave birth to the crisis. That's why I'm asking questions in the way that I'm asking questions. And I don't think that a vacuum cleaner is more sophisticated than a broom. Right? A vacuum cleaner might do it faster and better. But there's something about a broom there's a spirituality to the broom that bends your bodies, that makes for poetry, that makes for a different kind of world, right? That a vacuum cleaner knows nothing about. So I would also be careful about saying that pills and what the West has is necessarily sophisticated or better than what the babalawos are doing.
Yeah, I understand, because, why I'm saying that, because, we're not at home now, we're here, and we don't have access to those kind of treatment.
Yes, of course, of course.
So, and we've had, there's situations whereby when somebody's mental health challenge is not being addressed, immediately it leads to other issues.
Yes.
So that's part of what I mean. So do you think that there's a way to effectively integrate African traditional practice with Western mental health care?
I think integration is a double move. It has advantages. There has always been conversation about integration, for instance, in Nigeria. How do we blend indigenous knowledge systems with neuropsychiatric hospitals? And there's always something happening there. So maybe it could, I mean, I know that is already happening in universities in the United States. They are opening up, they have departments that hold for cross-cultural insights. But sometimes integration can lead to some kind of violent inclusion where what is being included is made to fit squarely within the politics of the colonizer. So that's also a problem. So I'm bringing up the nuances in a way that
So thank you so much. So how can a listener, I know you have to, how can a listener connect with you online or buy your books?
Just if you type my name, or you should be in Google, you should be able to see my websites, and my books or my talks or my lectures. They're quite popular. So yes.
I know you connected with a lot of other organizations as well, right?
Yes, I'm quite spread out in different organizations doing work with them. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you so much. So in closing, Pansa Pansa continue to normalize conversation about the importance of community engagement, about African immigrant experiences in America and in the diaspora, as I always say, as we continue to discuss issues affecting our communities, we're shredding away stigma associated with uncomfortable dialogue. Thank you so much, Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, for coming to Pansa Pansa podcast to share your wealth of knowledge with members of our African immigrant community in the diaspora and regarding the traditional belief system and the influence on our perception, our approach and management of mental illness. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing this important message to the Africans in the diaspora. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, man. Thank you so much.
Following my conversation with Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, I want to remind everyone that if you or somebody you know is dealing with mental health challenges, you don't have to face it alone. Help is available 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Just call or text 988-988 to connect with Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This free confidential services is staffed by a trained counselor ready to provide support you need at most. Taking the first step can be very difficult and it could be very challenging, but there's always somebody ready to listen to you and to help. Remember, reaching out can make a lot of difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pansa Pansa Live Podcast. We hope to have you back with us in the next episode as we continue to explore the nuances of the African immigrant experience. If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at talk@pansapansa.org. That is talk@pansapansa.org. And follow us on Instagram at pansa.pansa forum. Until next time, remember to spread kindness and love. Thank you and take care of yourself.